The public sphere is a term first coined by German philosopher Habermas in 1962 to describe when individuals come together as a public to discuss things that are important to all of them. When they all agree on something, that becomes public opinion. Ideally, this opinion has some effect on the government. I say ideally because Habermas's concept of the public sphere is largely his description of a theoretical perfect public sphere, which we can then use to critique real-world examples. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as literacy was increasing, the middle class began reading more and started talking to each other and forming general opinions about literature. This is a public sphere in itself, a literary public sphere. This will be important later. These conversations about literature developed an understood structure for communicating thoughts and debating them. Now, the same people who were in these literary public spheres were also making a lot of money as merchants in the early days of modern capitalism. And they needed to know current market conditions as quickly as possible to make sure they were getting a good deal. This led to the use of news sheets, which covered political events as much as economic ones, as that obviously also affected the markets. So now we have a middle class with predefined structure for critical thinking and debate through literature, and constant knowledge of current political affairs through the news. This leads to a well-informed group, already well-trained in debate, talking constantly to each other about politics and their opinions on it. This is the birth of the political public sphere. Habermas says that the political public sphere is the closest thing to a general public sphere, as it affects everyone. If the type of public sphere isn't specified, I'll be referring to the political public sphere from now on. For Habermas, an important part of the public sphere is interlocutors leaving behind their private differences to discuss public matters on an even playing field. Whether one individual had more or less money than the other, for example, was to be ignored in these discussions, as that was a private matter, and things like politics, which affected everyone, was public. This distinction was crucial. This crucial component was easy when the only people who were literate and had access to the news were white middle-class men. It was easy to put their relative private differences aside because their public needs and wants were quite similar. But as society focused more on the equality of its citizens, with higher literature rates, more widespread newspapers, women's suffrage, etc., differences between interlocutors became harder to ignore. Let's talk about discourse. Habermas has his own definition for discourse as something separate from normal communication or debate. Discourse happens when the consensus of a public sphere is challenged, and it relies on the assumption that every interlocutor is treated equally, and only says what they genuinely believe. The discourse is resolved when group consensus is reached again, either adopting the new idea or maintaining the original ones. This is what facilitates good discourse. According to Habermas, the white middle-class men in the early modern era were able to have fairly efficient discourse because of their similarities and low numbers. But as more people joined the public sphere, differences grew, and the genuine discourse was harder to achieve. All of a sudden, interlocutors are enemies, each trying to win the debate, rather than equals working together to find the best idea. Habermas identifies two main reasons for why the public sphere no longer has an effect on the government: welfare state mass democracies and non-state actors with more influence than voters. A welfare state mass democracy is a country where efforts are taken by the government to give everyone equal opportunities, such as unemployment pension, a right to vote, etc. This is what we were talking about earlier. Powerful non-state actors arise because now, much later on in the lifespan of capitalism, companies and lobby groups with massive funding can pressure governments into making decisions without any input from what voters think. Lobbyists can both offer large donations or favors to governments, or threaten to take pre-existing ones away to pressure governments to do what they want. These favors, both in the forms of monetary donations and state-contracted business deals, etc., have much more impact than any one voter or even a group of voters, especially if a representative is already popular enough to afford to lose some voters. Habermas describes this as the refeudalization of society, where private individuals have very little control over the government and a select few very powerful organizations can pressure it heavily. With the advent of the modern internet, many people wondered if it could be a new place for public spheres to take hold and for people to organize with each other to have more control of the government. This hasn't turned out to be the case. The popular content on social media platforms, what many people use the internet for, is often not political at all, or doesn't take it seriously. When social media content does take politics seriously, it is intentionally sensationalist and polarizing, as that is what performs best on those sites. This, along with personalized feeds, quickly puts a politically minded person in an echo chamber of one school of thought, designed to keep them engaged instead of introducing them to new ideas. This leads to extremely biased, one-sided discourse, if any even happens at all. In many ways, social media sites are just an extension of the refeudalization Habermas first spoke about in the mid-1900s. There is one site, though, that puts users on a relatively even playing field, specifically grouping people together because of their similarities, which I believe does create smaller, more specific public spheres: Reddit. Reddit has no main feed. You have to subscribe to different subreddits, each one focused on a specific topic. Each subreddit with their own volunteer-based moderators that remove off-topic posts, and through mainly text-based posts, users can put their private differences aside once more, if not only because they have no way of knowing them. Most Reddit posts are made with the intention of starting conversations or eliciting opinions in their comments, as opposed to Instagram or YouTube posts that by and large just state sensationalized opinions and whose comments are full of bad faith arguments. As well as this, you follow groups and communities on Reddit rather than individual people. This decentralizes power away from any one person to sway the opinions of whoever is following that subreddit, as might happen on Instagram or YouTube. Now, this isn't to say it's perfect. Go on the conservative subreddit and the front page is entirely pro-Trump. Good luck having constructive discourse there on claims he is a fascist. But the most upvoted post of all time for the conservative subreddit is a critique of the January 6th Capitol attack, with the comments agreeing that they do not condone it. So there is a nuance. Similarly, good luck trying to have meaningful discourse on capitalism in the leftist subreddit, etc. Outside of subreddits specifically about certain sides of politics, where people, especially today, can be extremely biased and polarized, more neutral subreddits, such as those for countries in general or even cities, can have genuine discourse. I personally have often seen that to be the case on the subreddit for Australia, for example. Other topics, remember the literary public sphere, seem to flourish on Reddit, mostly because the outcome doesn't change anyone's livelihood the way politics does. Go to any competitive video game subreddit and you'll see genuine discourse on what the best strategies are. Often the creators of the video games are active in these subreddits and take consensus of the community into consideration, making it an almost ideal public sphere. People have good Habermasian discourse on what programming language to use for certain projects in programming subreddits. The list goes on. I'm sure people who aren't nerds discuss their favorite football player or something in the sports subreddits. So we see that the broader public sphere, as described by Habermas, is nowhere near as popular or powerful as it once was. The political public sphere has become so broad that genuine discourse is very difficult. On top of this, voters are no longer as powerful as they once were, with the increase of large non-state actors causing the refeudalization of politics. The advent of the modern internet does not solve either of these problems, because of how most social media sites are structured. However, Reddit specifically focuses on grouping similar individuals to talk about topics on a more or less even playing field. Users can self-select to be in more polarized subreddits, but if they want, they are free to join neutral ones or even ones that disagree with their beliefs, allowing them a level of control over the ideas they are exposed to that other social media sites have no interest in giving. In this way, though the public sphere is not as powerful as it once was, it can still be found and used to develop ideas, especially on smaller scale public spheres. But the political public spheres found on Reddit, though interesting, still don't solve the problem that most voters don't see it, and even if they did, they hold less power to do anything about it because of lobbyist groups.